What if I told you that the world's next nuclear bomb could be a defensive one? Introducing a small strip of land that exists between Belarus, which is a Russian ally, and Poland, which is a NATO country, that stretches between mainland Russia and the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. This also borders Lithuania, and actually, so the border is actually between Lithuania and Poland, but it is a gap that could be contested at some point by Russia, and the idea of a Suwalki Gap invasion has existed for a couple of decades now, ever since Lithuania joined NATO and Poland also joined NATO. Belarus and Russia, of course, are allies. There is no such thing anymore as the Warsaw Pact, which used to include Poland, by the way, so Poland has basically switched sides. And this is about a 65-mile long strip of land, maybe a few miles wide, on the border between Poland and Lithuania, which also includes on one end of the border, on the southern tip, it connects to Belarus, which in turn connects to the Kaliningrad Oblast, which is the exclave I was just talking about. So those two allies could attack a border between currently NATO countries. And this has been a worry at least since 2014 on behalf of those European nations. Now, why would a nuclear bomb here be defensive? Pretty simple. It would be if Russia or Belarus or some combination thereof were to invade this strip of land and try to take it entirely for themselves and cut Lithuania and Poland out of it. Ever since the Kaliningrad Oblast was created in the wake of World War II, it has been, the transport connections are very perilous, and they are basically regulated by Lithuania at this point. And that border has been closed since September, due to the fact that many Russian and Belarusian airplanes have made incursions into Lithuanian and Polish airspace. This, of course, is a violation of sovereignty, which has only increased the fears of an invasion of Lithuania and Poland. These are aggressive actions that have been taken by the Russian Federation, and specifically Vladimir Putin. These incursions have been they've been fierce reactions every time. These countries are not going to lay down and take it, basically. So here's where the nuclear situation comes in. And I don't have any special intelligence or any insight within NATO or within any of the belligerents' war operations. This is just a theory, but it's a plausible one. And here's how it works. Russia and Belarusian forces would in turn invade the Suwalki Gap in order to be able to reclaim that strip of land for their alliance and obtain a free connection to the Kaliningrad Oblast, and also as an action against NATO itself, who have long time been the enemies of Russia. In this invasion, it is theorized that approximately 1.5 million soldiers could possibly die. What would happen in my theory would be that if the NATO allies, Lithuania, Poland, and anybody else with NATO, withdraws from the Strip. Simply allows the Russian and Belarusian soldiers in, but then drops a nuclear bomb on them. So these countries would bomb their own sovereign border. But of course the casualties would be entirely Russian and Belarusian at this point. They would entirely be Putin's. The environmental impact would obviously be substantial. Today's nuclear bombs are hundreds of times more powerful than the atom bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. However, the bombs that would be dropped would possibly be a hydrogen bomb, which again 1,000 times more powerful than the atom bombs of Japan. Obviously, every Russian and Belarusian soldier in this theoretical situation would be annihilated, or almost all of them would be. This is a very lightly populated strip. There are very few buildings for shelter, so any direct hit on these soldiers would be, well, direct. They would almost immediately be toast. And the nuclear fallout would, given the natural winds, would flow east, which would take it right into Belarus, and possibly the Russian Federation itself eventually, as they are the country located directly behind Belarus. There would probably be some blowback into Lithuania or Poland. Now, where would these nuclear weapons come from? Are Lithuania and Poland nuclear-armed countries? Well, no. However, the United States does have nukes stationed in Poland. They're on their bases. So I believe these would be the weapons that would be used to attack the invasion force of the Russian Federation and the Belarusian soldiers. Again, entirely a theory, but given NATO history, it can't be ruled out. The Western Allies have always been a crafty bunch. And this would obviously stop an invasion cold in multiple ways. Obviously, the initial effect of the bomb would kill hundreds of thousands of Eastern soldiers. But on top of that, the nuclear fallout would prevent any reinforcements from coming in. That would be the equivalent of, well, I mean, I guess the Soviets did this before once. The Soviets highly paid cleanup crews at Chernobyl to go in for several minutes, and several minutes is fatal, by the way, after the nuclear explosion at Chernobyl. However, the Suwalki Gap would also become useless for its intended purpose of transferring goods from Belarus into Kaliningrad. It would become practically useless. I'm sure the railroad itself that goes through there would be destroyed. Any road transit would be destroyed. And so its initial purpose would be completely useless. Again, Vladimir Putin would have to pay an enormous amount of money for people to go in there and repair these transport lines in the wake of a nuclear fallout. To show how much of an impact this nuclear fallout can have, the exclusion area around Chernobyl is still the exclusion zone to this day, even though the Chernobyl incident happened in 1985. So we're about 30 years, maybe a little over 30 years now, 40 years beyond that incident, and the area is still considered unsafe for human habitation. The city next to Chernobyl is called Pripyat, which is basically the world's largest ghost town. Now, ever since this area obtained autonomy from Russia, Pripyat and Chernobyl are actually part of Ukraine. But the Soviet Union has a history of putting its own citizens in danger for the sake of advancing its own development, and in the case of Chernobyl, saving the plant. So there it is, guys, a theoretical, very theoretical nuclear invasion, a very theoretical nuclear invasion of Russian territory. I mean, not Russian territory, NATO territory, with Lithuania and Poland's border, called the Suwalki Gap, being nuked, but against an invading force, not against themselves. So enjoy your Saturday morning. I'm going to go do my thing today, and I will see you later. Peace out, homies.